the torches gutter first. That is what the guides always mention when they speak of the deep chamber, the one carved 30 feet beneath the Maltese bedrock, its ceiling painted with ochre spirals that seem to breathe in flickering light. Every flame brought into that lowest room behaves strangely, burning low and blue, starved of something the air up above never lacks. Visitors who stood in the space archaeologists call the Oracle Room, a small niche cut into the living rock, have described a low, resonant hum rising from nowhere and everywhere at once, a vibration that settles in the chest before it ever reaches the ear. Below that chamber, deeper still, lie corridors where excavators once found the commingled bones of more than 7,000 human beings stacked and scattered across a labyrinth of hand-cut rooms that predate the pyramids of Giza by centuries. This is the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni on the island of Malta, and it is very likely the oldest surviving underground temple complex on Earth. Long before anyone called it haunted, the people who built it were already treating it as a threshold between the living world and something else entirely. If stories like this one keep you up at night wondering what really happened in the ancient world, go ahead and tap the like button now, because this is exactly the kind of mystery this channel was built to explore. To understand why this place unsettled people for thousands of years, we have to go back to the very beginning, long before Rome, before Greece, before even the great stone circles of Britain. Around 4000 BCE, small farming communities were establishing themselves on the Maltese archipelago, a scatter of limestone islands in the middle of the Mediterranean, isolated enough to develop their own distinct religious architecture. These were not wandering nomads, they built. Across Malta and neighboring Gozo, they raised megalithic temples of enormous limestone slabs, structures like Gantija and Tarxian, whose scale led later visitors to assume they must have been the work of giants. Archaeologists today regard these Maltese temples as among the earliest freestanding stone monuments built by human hands anywhere in the world, constructed centuries before Stonehenge and the pyramids at Giza. The hypogeum belongs to this same tradition, but instead of rising toward the sky, its builders turned downward, carving an entire temple complex into solid rock, chamber by chamber, using little more than flint and obsidian tools, deer antler picks, and stone hammers. Construction likely began sometime around 3600 BCE and continued in phases across many generations, extending down through roughly 3000 BCE. The hypogeum was not built in a single burst of activity by one ruler or one workforce. It grew organically, level by level, as the community's needs and beliefs evolved. The uppermost level is the oldest, its chambers closest in style to natural caves, suggesting the builders may have started by enlarging existing rock-cut tombs. Over time, later generations pushed deeper, developing greater technical skill, until the middle and lower levels display something remarkable. Doorways, trilithon niches, and decorative moldings carved directly from bedrock in deliberate imitation of the above-ground temple architecture. Malta's builders were simultaneously perfecting in stone block structures under the open sky. Corbelled ceilings mimic timber and thatch roofing. Painted red ochre spirals, thought by researchers to represent life, blood, or spiritual energy, still cling faintly to the ceiling of the Oracle Room, one of the best preserved examples of prehistoric painted decoration anywhere in Europe. Who exactly worshipped here and what they believed remains partly reconstructed from the physical evidence itself, since this civilization left no written language behind. What we do have is staggering in scale. Excavations beginning in the early 20th century, first noticed accidentally by workmen cutting cisterns for a new housing development in 1902, eventually revealed that the hypogeum functioned simultaneously as an underground temple and as a vast communal necropolis. The remains of an estimated 6,000 to 7,000 individuals were recovered from its chambers, though disturbance, later looting, and early excavation methods mean that number is an estimate rather than a precise count. Bodies appear to have been interred over many centuries, joints and bones eventually pushed aside to make room for new burials, a practice suggesting an ongoing, living relationship between the community and its dead, rather than a single catastrophic event. This is where the earliest layer of the site's eerie reputation takes root, not in later ghost stories, but in the sheer, almost incomprehensible density of human death packed into a space carved by hand from rock. Priests, if that is the right word for whoever conducted ceremonies here, would have moved through corridors thick with the presence of ancestors, past niches holding skulls and grave goods, red ochre staining the stone around them like old blood that never fully dried. Small clay figurines were found throughout the complex, including the famous reclining sleeping lady, a carved figure of a full-bodied woman lying on her side as though in restful slumber or perhaps trance, discovered in one of the deeper chambers. Scholars generally interpret such figures as connected to fertility worship, ancestor veneration, or possibly a mother goddess cult that recurs across many of Malta's temple sites, though without written testimony, any specific theology remains an informed reconstruction rather than certainty. The oracle room itself deserves particular attention because it is the single feature most responsible for the hypogeum's enduring, almost universal reputation as a place where the boundary between this world and another grows thin. It is a small chamber, barely large enough for a few people to stand in, cut with unusual care and precision compared to the rougher passages around it. A low opening carved into one wall allows a voice pitched deep and resonant to reverberate through the entire lower complex, audible in chambers many meters away, amplified and distorted by the stone itself. Modern acoustic researchers have measured a distinct resonant frequency in the room, and while the ancient builders certainly lacked any scientific vocabulary for acoustics, it is difficult to imagine they carved this chamber with its uniquely responsive geometry entirely by accident. Whether it was used for oracular pronouncements, ritual chanting meant to summon ancestral spirits, or ceremonies designed to disorient and awe initiates in near total darkness, we cannot say with certainty. What we can say is that anyone standing in the surrounding corridors while a voice rolled and boomed unseen through solid rock would have experienced something that felt, in the most literal sense, otherworldly. If you are enjoying this journey into the world's most mysterious ancient sites, this is a great moment to subscribe because we are only getting started and there are far stranger stories from the ancient world still ahead. By the time the hypogeum fell out of active use, sometime after 2500 BCE, Malta's remarkable temple-building culture had already begun to decline for reasons historians still debate, possibly linked to resource depletion, climate shifts, social upheaval, or the arrival of new populations with different traditions. The temples across the islands, both the underground hypogeum and its above-ground megalithic cousins, were gradually abandoned, their purposes forgotten by the very descendants of the people who built them. For roughly 4,000 years, the hypogeum lay sealed beneath the earth, silent, its corridors slowly filling with debris, its existence unknown to the Phoenicians, Romans, Arabs, and Knights of Malta, who successively ruled the islands above. This long silence is itself part of what makes the site so haunting to modern visitors. An entire civilization's most sacred underground sanctuary, packed with the bones of thousands, simply vanished from human memory, hidden directly beneath streets that would one day be walked by people with no idea what lay beneath their feet. Its rediscovery in 1902 reads almost like the opening of a ghost story in its own right. Workmen digging cisterns for new terraced housing broke through into the uppermost chamber and, not initially grasping the significance of what they had found, continued construction work that damaged portions of the upper level before archaeologists were called in. The Jesuit priest and archaeologist Manuel Magri began excavations shortly afterward, but he died in 1907 while working in Tunisia, and his detailed field notes on the hypogeum were lost, a genuine historical loss that has frustrated researchers for over a century, since much of the context for the earliest, least disturbed, finds died with him. Excavations continued under Sir Themistocles Zammit, whose more systematic work through the 1910s produced the bulk of what we now know archaeologically about the site, including detailed records of the human remains, pottery, and ritual objects recovered from its chambers. It was during this early 20th century excavation period that certain unexplained details entered the historical record and fed directly into the temple's growing reputation for the uncanny. Zammit and his team documented an unusually high proportion of elongated, asymmetrical skulls among the remains, a detail that has since attracted enormous public fascination and no shortage of fringe theorizing about ancient alien contact or hidden bloodlines. The mainstream archaeological and forensic consensus, however, attributes this cranial elongation to a combination of artificial head-binding practices, possibly for cultural or status reasons, and pathological conditions such as hydrocephalus or genetic disorders present within an isolated island population where certain traits could become more concentrated over generations. It is a far less sensational explanation than the legends that later grew around it, but it is the one supported by physical and comparative anthropological evidence. More persistent still is the folklore surrounding disappearances connected to the site, a story that circulates widely today, but deserves to be treated with real caution. According to a popular tale with no verified documentary source, a group of school children visiting the hypogeum in the early 20th century wandered into an unmapped passage and vanished, never to be found, with reports of their fading cries supposedly heard echoing from deep within the rock for days afterward. No contemporary newspaper account, excavation report, or municipal record from the period corroborates this story in any verifiable form, and Maltese heritage authorities have publicly stated they can find no basis for it in the historical record. It appears to be a piece of 20th century folklore, likely inspired by the genuine, well-documented unease the site provokes, rather than a real event. Its persistence, however, tells us something true about the hypogeum, regardless of the story's factual status. This is a place so genuinely disorienting, so saturated with the physical presence of the ancient dead, that people have felt compelled to explain its strangeness through story when history alone did not seem to satisfy them. I want to pause here and ask you directly, because this is the kind of question that divides even serious historians. Do you think the legends that grow up around places like the hypogeum, the humming stone, the ochre-painted death chambers, the vanished children, come from genuine, unexplainable experiences people actually had within those walls? Or are they misunderstood natural phenomena, ordinary acoustics and psychology, dressed up over generations into something supernatural? I'd genuinely like to know what you think, so leave your answer in the comments below. The temple's aura of dread was not invented by tour guides or ghost hunters. It was arguably built into the architecture itself, by design, 4,000 years before anyone thought to call it haunted. Consider the sensory experience of a ritual participant descending through the hypogeum's levels in antiquity, likely by torch or oil lamp, since the site's builders relied on fire for light in a space with no natural illumination beyond a single upper aperture. The air grows cooler and heavier with depth. Torch flames genuinely do burn differently in enclosed, oxygen-limited underground chambers, guttering and dimming in ways that would have seemed charged with meaning to people who had no concept of atmospheric chemistry, only the lived sense that the deep places were different, resistant, watchful. Sound behaves strangely too, swallowed in some passages and monstrously amplified in others, a property the builders of the Oracle Room appear to have understood and deliberately exploited. Add to this the physical presence of thousands of the dead, generation after generation of ancestors interred in the very walls a worshiper brushed past, and you have a space engineered, whether consciously or through long ritual trial and error, to produce awe bordering on terror. The line between religious sanctity and haunted dread may not have existed at all for the people who built this place. For them, the hypogeum's power and its fearfulness were likely one and the same thing. Today, the hypogeum of Hal Saflieni is recognized by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site, and Maltese authorities strictly limit daily visitor numbers to protect its extraordinarily fragile microclimate, since humidity and carbon dioxide from human breath were found to be damaging the ancient paintwork in stone. Only a small number of people are permitted inside each day, descending in tightly controlled groups into chambers where photography is forbidden and silence is requested, partly out of conservation necessity and partly, one senses, out of simple respect for what the space still seems to demand. Modern archaeologists continue to study the site using non-invasive techniques, mapping its acoustics, analyzing residual pigments, and reassessing the skeletal collection with contemporary forensic methods that Zamet's generation could never have applied. Each new study tends to strip away one more layer of sensationalism while somehow leaving the core mystery intact, because the deepest question the hypogeum poses was never really about ghosts. It is about how a Neolithic farming community, without metal tools, without writing, without any of the technologies we associate with civilization's advance, managed to carve a religious architecture into solid rock so psychologically precise that it still unsettles visitors 5,500 years later. If this story pulled you in the way, it pulled in the priests and pilgrims who once descended into that rock. Share it with someone who loves history as much as you do, because stories like this deserve to be passed on, the same way this place was passed silently between generations for centuries before anyone wrote its name down. No one now living can say with certainty what the builders of the hypogeum believed waited for them in that lowest humming chamber, or whether the voices some visitors still swear they catch in its silences are the acoustics of ancient stone, the pressure of imagination meeting genuine unease, or something neither science nor legend has yet fully named. What remains is the temple itself, cut by hand into the dark, holding the bones of thousands and the painted spirals of a religion whose name we will never know, still capable, after 56 centuries, of making a torch flame gutter and a modern visitor's breath catch in their throat. If you want to keep exploring the world's oldest and strangest sacred places, make sure you are subscribed, drop a like on your way out, tell us in the comments what you make of this one, and join us for the next documentary, because the ancient world is still quietly waiting to be heard.